Hello. I'd like to discuss Gilgo, the Gilgo killer, Gilgo Beach killer, Rex Hummerman, whatever his name is. And, you know, I'm not 100% sold that he's guilty. I know he pled guilty, but, look, a lot of people that are innocent plead guilty. The evidence they claim to have was overwhelming. Uh, Against him, in the sense that, you know, juries don't really dig deep, and you know, they want to give the family closure, and there's a lot of families involved, so it's not one family, and you know, uh, I always go back to the Central Park Five. Those five boys weren't even in the park, and they were convicted of rape and assault, and that's why I always go back to that because, and Donald Trump called for their execution and everything else, and they were exonerated, and the real person that did it turned himself in 20 years later and said, I did it. And they chased him away. They didn't want to accept that he did it. They didn't want to open the can of worms that they had created with the false imprisonment and the false charges they put on these boys. So, and uh, the DA in this case, he's elected. He's an elected official, and if he wants to get reelected, he has to produce. And I think to get the the plea bargain from Rex and the Gilgo Beach, that helps him get reelected. And probably I wouldn't doubt it if you saw him run for Attorney General or Governor of New York in the future. And so with all this as a backdrop to what's going on, how can you really trust what you hear? Uh, you know, they didn't have a smoking gun. They didn't know where these girls were killed. They didn't know uh, when they were killed. They just knew when they went missing. And that was about all they knew. And so, except for two hairs that they said they have with DNA and experimental DNA to show that the link, and whether they planted that hair, DNA can be planted, and and I don't trust the police. I don't trust the government, and when they say something happened, it's usually not true. And when it's to their benefit to say it, that's even more reason it's not true. And, I think to buy everything at face value, it's just like Trump is saying we're going to war for nuclear weapons in Iran. And it's not true. We're going to war because Israel wants a war with Iran to wipe out their ability to attack Israel. And that was the importance and reason for the war. And they were a threat to no one. And I'll just get into that for a minute, but they're attacking their neighbors. Now, Arab people in general are not warring people. Uh, they have their differences. They don't like each other, but they're not really warring people. They war within themselves. Their clans fight each other, the other clans, and stuff like that. And even in Iraq, they would fight each other within the country. But as we saw with Iraq, we sold Iraq millions and millions of military weapons and billions of dollars so they could fight Iran. Now the Qatar and UAE and Saudi Arabia and Iraq still, they're going to buy weapons from us to protect themselves from Iran now. And it just helps us. It helps our military machine. It helps back the building and making of military weapons in our country. And it helps us sell to those countries because now they have a reason to buy those weapons. They're in threat from Iran, so they have to protect themselves and their citizens. So they have to have, a lot of them, they probably don't even have an army, or an Air Force, and now they will. Now they'll have a $1 trillion Army and Air Force, that they don't need. And, and this is what the United States does. It creates a need for military weapons, and where there is none. That was what NATO was all about, was selling NATO all our weapons, and NATO hasn't used any weapons ever since NATO's been created, basically. So, it's all the fear mongers, it's the money. And again, with the Rex thing, it's the fear mongering. Aren't you glad they have the serial killer in jail? Well, my question about the serial killer is, why did he stop killing? If he's a serial killer, none of those bodies they found at Gilgo Beach were new. And why did he stop killing? Serial killers can't stop killing. Rifkin, when they found Rifkin, he had a body in the back of his pickup when they pulled him over. So he didn't stop killing. He was killing right up until the last absolute second. And, that's what serial killers do. They don't take a 10-year hiatus. And that's what they're saying Rex did. And that's why I have my questions, But, look, you can't trust the government at all. I attacked Bill Gates, and the first thing they did to me was lock me up in a psych ward and pump me up with drugs. And now I'm on a court order to take psych meds, and I believe psych meds are a way of them killing me. It's a form of murder. Now, they don't call it that, and they won't have you think it's that way, but I'm telling you that's what it is. And my one point of reference that I would point to you that it's a form of murder is, and I'm not mentally ill, and I think you can tell I'm not mentally ill, but they have me labeled that way so they can make me weak. And if I were to become popular with this YouTube channel, they would say, oh, he's mentally ill, you can't listen to him. And that's the narrative they would try to sell you. But back to my objective is that, do you know any old mentally ill people? I mean, really old. Do you know any 80-year-old mentally ill people that are on psych meds? Even 70-year-old people that are on psych meds? I mean, 70 you might. 80 you don't. 90 you definitely don't. And I don't even go any higher than that. But, and if you know somebody that's 70 and on psych meds and has been on psych meds for a while, they also have other problems like type 2 diabetes, they have kidney failure, heart failure, they have liver failure. And these meds that they give you cause all those things, and they cause your death. And I have type 2 diabetes. I had 3 stents in my heart. I had 2 heart attacks, which I believe was caused by the COVID vaccine. And, look, it is what it is. They're trying to kill me, and I'm not trying to make a public issue of it. They have me under a court order. If I refuse to take the meds, they lock me up. And so if I want to be free, I have to submit myself to taking my meds. And, whatever. I really haven't done anything since threatening Bill Gates that would warrant medication. I've been attacked. I've been attacked in a big way by a lot of people in my town. I'm banned from AA meetings all throughout Nassau County. I can't go to any AA meetings in Nassau County because I'm banned. And, I think that was all. And I didn't do anything, The one thing AA doesn't like, and because most alcoholics live by lies, their whole life is a lie, and I would point that out. And I think you can see that with my videos, and if you watch my videos, you can see that I'm very good at pointing out the truth. And they didn't like that. They took that as a direct attack to their lies, to their manipulation, to what they do in AA, and I believe there's a lot of sex trafficking in AA. There's a lot of, because look, sex traffickers are alcoholics, you know. So why wouldn't you think that they go to AA, they're gonna stop doing sex trafficking, you know, because they're sober now, you know, like oh no, their penis just went away and their desires just went away because they stopped drinking. Not, not gonna happen. So you know there is that. So I know I bounce around with ideas and stuff, and it's hard to keep up sometimes. But you know, I just I, I I give you right off the top of my head. No, I'm not reading a script. I don't write a script. I think you can tell from my videos, right off the top of my head. You know, and you know I do think. Like Rex, I thought about him for a while. I've written a lot of different letters about him, and they're on my Facebook. They're on my other things, and you know I don't hide my opinion, and I'm totally, you know, look, the last DA in Suffolk County went to jail, you know, so the last police commissioner in Suffolk County went to jail, you know, so we're not talking about good people. We're talking about people that get away. And the one thing with Rex, you know, they said a cop did the Gilgo Beach killings, but it was a cop that did it, and that's why he got away with it for so long. And that could still be very true. And, you know, it doesn't look good for the DA who's elected and wants to go for Department of Justice and all that to go after cops. You know, it doesn't look good for him. They don't they don't want that on their record. You know, they don't people have hold cops in high regard. They don't want to think of them as murderers and serial killers when some of them are, you know, and they go for those jobs because they want the power. They like the power. You know, that's why a lot of cops are narcissists, because they like the power, they like the control, you know, and just don't be fooled, you know. It's just, you know, I go on X, and X has a lot of conspiracy theory stuff, and you know, some of it you got to take with a grain of salt. You know, they make it sound good, they make it sound real, and you know, and I don't know. It's hard. Some of it seems really outrageous, like it's totally unbelievable, and maybe that's why it doesn't get the press it deserves, because the press is so anti-conspiracy theory. You know, when they put a conspiracy theory on the news, they 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 want to label it conspiracy theory. They don't want to say, "Oh, this is a real thing," and then have it be labeled conspiracy theory down the road. You know, and we fell for it kind of thing. You know, they're afraid of that. You know, and I think to an extent they know it's real, and they label it a conspiracy theory so you don't think it's real. You know, just like the going to the moon. You know, it's a conspiracy theory to believe they didn't go. You know, and they didn't go. It was a sound stage in Hollywood. That's where they went. You know, they didn't go to the moon. And you know, for me to say that, they're going to say, "Oh, he's a conspiracy theorist," you know. And the reason they came up with those words is because when you say conspiracy theorist, you're not believed by a majority of the people. But you know, you gotta look at a majority of the people voted for Trump, so the majority is a bunch of idiots. You know, so the majority doesn't believe you. It's not a negative to you. It's not a negative, and you shouldn't look at it as a negative. Because the majority are usually wrong, you know, and they prey off that. They know that you're sheep, and you always have been sheep. And I'm just saying, stop being sheep.